Hello and welcome to Inside Iraq. I'm David Foster. Who said the war wasn't about oil? If a new law is passed in Iraq, the big multinationals will get a huge share of the country's vast oil wealth, with deals that could secure them black gold for several generations to come. Iraq's Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki is reportedly finalising deals which he says are for the benefit of all the country's religious and ethnic communities. Critics accuse al-Maliki of handing over the country's national wealth. So is the new oil law really good news for all Iraqis, or is it part of a US game plan to take control of the world's second largest oil reserves? Here's Nicole Johnston.
Iraq's most valuable natural asset, its oil, under attack. But there are two battles underway. One is to protect its pipelines. The other is to protect it from foreign firms, which are after a share of the profits. The world's biggest oil companies are already there and ready to sign deals. It's expected that by the end of this month, 5 oil consortiums will agree to supply equipment and support to the Iraq oil industry.
Technical service or technical support agreements are probably at this stage the most practical and the quickest way of increasing Iraq's production capacity.
And here's where the agreements are. In the northern region of Kirkuk, Shell has the concession. In the south near Basra, BP is in the Rumaila oil field. Close by is ExxonMobil in Al Zabiya. And sharing a number of other oil fields in the south are companies including Chevron, BHP Billiton and Total. For BP, Shell, Total and ExxonMobil, it's their first venture back into Iraq. They were driven out 36 years ago when the industry was nationalised. But they have not been offered a share of future Iraqi oil profits. Not yet, anyway. These deals are a stopgap measure. Iraq pays the companies to help them develop the fields. In the meantime, the country's oil law has been in limbo for 2 years. Critics say it gives foreign companies too much control.
There is the sensitivity and concern that the Iraqi people have when it comes to oil. They all are very skeptical, and they have to be convinced whatever form foreign involvement is going to be in their oil industry, that it will be beneficial for Iraqi nation.
The other problem is Iraq's regions. They claim the constitution gives the reserves to them, not the federal government.
That would probably lead to conflicts in the future between the provinces and the federal government, between the provinces themselves.
So the Kurdistan regional government has gone it alone. It gave up waiting for the national oil law and signed 15 private deals of its own. The Iraqi government says these are illegal. So now, with foreign companies about to move back into town, the battle for oil is set to begin. And this time, it's about the profits. Nicole Johnston, Inside Iraq.
Are Iraqis signing away their future with this controversial new oil law? And is the oil law linked in any way to agreements between the US and Iraq over a long-term US military presence in the country? To discuss these issues, we have with us Kamil Mahdi, an economist from the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom, and Robert Bryce, an oil and energy expert from Austin in Texas. Well, unfortunately, despite many attempts, we can't get any officials from the Iraqi oil ministry to be in this discussion. But here are some remarks recently defending the new oil law.
We will not look at the nationality of the companies. We will not have any political consideration in our contract bidding.
I believe we have to give the Iraqi government and the Iraqi parliament the flexibility to decide what is the best for Iraq. If we Iraqis can develop our oil industry by ourselves, with our expertise, with our money, with our manpower, let it be. I am 100% behind it and for it. But if we cannot, and if we need to ask foreign companies to come and invest in Iraq, I think we should. To exclude foreign investment in Iraq completely is absolutely wrong.
Yes, we could buy the expertise. There is no doubt about that. But we not really do need the expertise. We need the technology as well, and we need the finance, and we need really time to be as short as possible. All this factor cannot come together only by bringing the expertise. So we need all this together to be able to build Iraq, reconstruct Iraq, and Iraq needs to be constructed as soon as possible.
Well, some thoughts there on where the money's going, how much there's going to be, and to whom. Kamil Mahdi, let me turn to you first of all in the United Kingdom, down at Exeter University. Who's going to get the most out of this? Will it be the multinationals, the Shells, the Exxons, the BPs, or will it be the Iraqi people?
Well, the Iraqi people have their interest in their oil, whereas Shell and BP and Exxon are interested in controlling that oil. So the oil law itself is in fact designed to bring these companies into a position that would, if applied in the way that they would want, they would get control of the reserves of Iraq that have been nationalized back in 1961 and in 1972. There's absolutely no need for Iraq to bring these companies back to control reserves. There is a need to cooperate on technological issues with a range of companies from many countries, but not to bring them to control reserves.
So you have to wonder why they were invited in with such generous contracts. They said, been working for nothing for so long, just out of the kindness of their hearts. Well, that kindness has been repaid to some extent.
Well, first of all, there hasn't been the contracts that they want so far. What they want is long-term contracts that would give them control of somewhere between 20 to 25 years of oil fields that have been already discovered, known, mapped, and oil fields that contain absolutely no risk in their development. The Iraqi people do not need them for this. And unfortunately, the oil law being discussed at the moment would open the possibility of these companies coming in to have production sharing contracts or contracts of that kind that would give these companies control over the oil. It is not in the interest of the Iraqi people.
Thank you very much for now. Robert Bryce in Texas. I've heard it said that, what are there, 115 billion barrels of proven reserves, possibly double that in terms of unexplored oil so far, and that could account for every single Iraqi citizen for $1 million. Well, it's clearly not as clear-cut as that, but there's a lot of money in it for somebody somewhere.
Sure. Well, I think what's interesting is that when you look back at Iraqi history, this is what's old is new again. Remember, it was in the 1930s when these same companies, Shell, Total, Exxon, and BP, were running the Iraqi Petroleum Company, IPC, along with C.S. Gulbenkian, to get Iraqi oil from Kirkuk to Haifa, which was the original export point. So, while all of this is interesting, and it remains to be seen what happens with the oil law, I think it's worthwhile pausing for a minute and looking back 7 decades and saying, really, what has changed in all of this time is not much. When you look at how these international oil companies representing various countries are interested in getting Iraq's oil wealth. I think the one wild card, though, when you look at this oil law and look to the future is, what are the Kurds going to do? Because they've already signed 15 different contracts, at least 15 different contracts with 20 different companies from 12 different countries. So will the Kurds abide by whatever oil law is passed in Baghdad? I think remains to be seen, because they already have an oil pipeline that allows them to export their oil through Ceyhan in Turkey. And so they may well decide to continue going it alone.
Well, the Kurds, of course, maintain that any agreement they've already signed stands, because they are allowed to sort out their own agreements. You're right to say we'll see exactly what happens. Was there ever any doubt that this was going to be the case, that the contracts would be handed out, lucrative contracts to outsiders? Because let's go back to 1999, when a certain gentleman said, where is the future oil of the world going to come from? Well, it's going to come from the Middle East. That's where the prize ultimately lies. And that man, 1999, is still America's Vice President, Dick Cheney. So with comments like that, was there ever any doubt that this was going to be the case, that big contracts would go to US companies?
Well, that's hard to say. Look, America's strategic interest in the Middle East has always been connected to oil. The invasion of Iraq, if you look back at 2003, the initial objectives of the American military when it invaded were, of course, the oil resources. The first American soldier killed in Iraq in the line of duty was killed in the Rumaila oil field. So there's no question that America has decided that, and I think wrongly in many cases, that the militarization of the Middle East oil resources has been a priority. And I think that now, as we go forward, I think it's clear that this militarization strategy has not been helpful, and that it may well turn out to be the greatest strategic blunder the U.S. has ever made.
Kamil Mahdi, let's go back to you and look at the economics of this to a certain extent. Was it ever feasible for the Iraqis to do this alone? They did need outside help, didn't they?
No. It's absolute. That's not correct. It certainly is feasible. There have been, of course, enormous developments, technological developments in oil prospecting and drilling, from which the Iraqis have been excluded through sanctions and long periods of war. These are technologies that are available on the market, and they can be acquired in all kinds of other contracts, in service contracts, in which the major oil companies may or may not be involved. The issue here is the control of reserves and the control and management of the oil industry. The Iraqis can and have done. They can control their oil industries. In fact, they have built their oil industry. For 50 years, 45 years, in fact, the multinationals who controlled Iraq's oil simply pumped the oil out of the ground and left an environmental mess. They didn't leave an effective oil industry. They didn't build a single commercial refinery in Iraq throughout that period. The oil industry, as we see it today, as it developed subsequently, was the development of the Iraqi National Oil Company. And Iraqis can do it. Yes, they need cooperation, like everybody needs cooperation in this world.
But a big share going elsewhere. For now, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. You're watching Inside Iraq. We'll take a short break now, but please stay with us.
I am saddened that it is politically inconvenient to acknowledge what everyone knows. The Iraq War is largely about oil. Alan Greenspan, former head of the US Federal Reserve. To give every Iraqi citizen a stake in the country's economy, Iraq will pass legislation to share oil revenues among all Iraqis. George Bush, US President.
Welcome back. That's what we're talking about. The rush by the Iraqi government to push through the new oil law, despite threats of more sectarian violence and concerns over handing over control of its oil fields to foreign companies. Well, joining us to discuss these issues once again, Kamil Mahdi from the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom, and Robert Bryce, an oil and energy expert, talking to us from the United States, Austin in Texas. Mr. Bryce, first of all, if the Iraqi government had decided to go this, not alone, but certainly more independently, rather than bringing in the multinationals, how much more money do you think there would have been for the Iraqi people?
Well, how long is a piece of string? I can't answer that. I think that the line from George W. Bush earlier, I think, goes to the heart of the matter here. And ultimately, this is about mineral rights. Bush says, well, the mineral rights or the mineral wealth of Iraq should be given to the Iraqi people. I think this is really one of the long-term solutions in Iraq, is to provide some kind of royalty to the individual Iraqi people. You get more cash into the hands of the people that would then allow them to spend it, stimulate the economy, create businesses, and jumpstart an economy that desperately needs more cash and more entrepreneurial activity.
Whether that is actually going. Sorry to interrupt, but I have to ask you whether that is actually going to happen with a deal which at the moment allows certain companies to have certain contracts, and as soon as the new law comes in, all they have to do is match a tender from anybody else and they get the contract automatically. It's not a very fair system in the eyes of many, is it?
Well, it certainly appears that way from what's being reported. And I think Mr. Makni makes a good point in that the international oil companies seem to be the ones who have the most advantageous position. It may be better from the Iraqi standpoint to do deals with service companies rather than the international oil companies and just hire the service companies on a piecemeal basis and as needed basis. So given what's been reported, it sure appears that Exxon, Shell, BP, and Total are being given a pretty good deal here.
Kamil Mahdi, let's come to you now. Whatever happened to Tony Blair's idea of a trust fund into which all the oil revenue would go? It would be administered by the United Nations and it would be equally and fairly divided. No sign of profit in that idea, and it's gone away.
Well, really, this is a colonialist idea in a humanitarian guise, as what Tony Blair tends to do anyway. The idea of a trust fund means that Iraq will be constrained into how it develops its economy and how it spends its oil revenues. Yes, of course, Iraq has had problems in this respect. So have 100 other countries and so on. The issue here is, do we have a political process that answers to the Iraqi people and has their interests at heart, and a political process that represents something better for the future than Iraq has had, or not? The question here is, I disagree that oil should be handed out as individual entitlements of cash to people. Oil should be the fund that will finance the development of the country, that will allow major construction of infrastructure that has been destroyed by war and sanctions over a long period of time.
And is that going to
generate
happen?
Activity.
Is it going to happen with the rules that they want to bring in?
Well, no, it is not. Well, first of all, this is not directly related to the oil law. It's related to the whole set of economic policies that are being forced on Iraq by the United States, by the occupying powers, the United States and Britain, by the IMF, and with pressure from others, World Bank and others. These policies that demand that the state withdraw from the economy, hand over the cash that comes from oil to big multinationals in one way or another, in one way to the oil companies themselves, and other ways to lots of other companies to come in, rather than to activate the economy through the intervention of the state, at least in the initial stages of development. That's absolutely essential in all countries, and especially in oil countries.
Kamil Mahdi, let me ask you this point about whether the United States could actually have managed without Middle East oil. Was it inevitable that it needed a stronger hold on what it considers to be vital resources, given that some people believe Iraq's got either the second or third largest reserves in the world?
Well, let's look at the present crisis. The present crisis is a result of the United States, the present oil market crisis. It's the result of the United States policies throughout the 1990s. There are sanctions against Iraq, there are sanctions against Iran, there are sanctions against Libya. Throughout those periods, the United States has prevented the development of the industries in these countries and has contributed very considerably, of course, in addition to the inability of the United States to curtail its own consumption of oil.
And it's been suggested that these multinationals now could have contracts that will run for generations, taking a great deal of money from the oil reserves in that country. How does that impact on any kind of military deal in Iraq? Do the two have to go hand in hand?
Well, of course, you're going to need security before any significant increases in oil output, I think, can occur in Iraq. And that's, of course, the first priority for any Western company or any international oil company coming in. So is it a quid pro quo? I can't answer that. I would like to just bring up one other point, though, and that is, how does OPEC figure into this? Remember, the U.S., by being the occupying force in Iraq, is a de facto member of OPEC. OPEC was the first international body to recognize the occupying government or the U.S. government occupation in Iraq. So OPEC has been willing to recognize the Iraqis. Will OPEC, though, assume, though, that the Iraqis are able, with these contracts or with other contracts, to significantly raise their oil production capacity? Will OPEC allow that oil to come onto the market, or will they restrain production to keep prices high? I think those are kind of the interesting questions going forward with regard to OPEC vis-a-vis the U.S. and Iraq.
Quick thought from you, Mr. Bryce, then I'll put the same point to Khalid in Exeter. Will the Iraqis get rich out of the oil that they have, or will the corporations get rich?
Well, I mean, thus far, if you look at the history of the petrostates, enriching individual citizens has not been one of the hallmarks of oil development. So unless or until I know we disagree, Mr. Mahdi doesn't believe we need to distribute oil royalties to the individual Iraqis. I think that is one of the essentials here. It would set a new precedent in the Middle East to actually allow mineral right ownership by individuals, and that has been one of the keys in the development of the American oil industry, and I think it's one that should be mimicked in the Mideast. When you look at what bin Laden says, a lot of what he argues about is in fact mineral rights.
Kamil Mahdi, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, distributing oil revenues simply fuels inflation. What we need is production capacity inside employment jobs in the country. We don't want we don't need a consumer boom that simply fizzles out. Who will benefit from Iraq's oil? Well, the history has not been kind to Iraq on this, but it's not been even either. There have been several decades where Iraq has, in fact, undergone considerable development and levels of living increased tremendously between the 1950s and the 1970s. For 3 decades, Iraq had enjoyed fruits of development funded by oil.
Kamil Mahdi, thank you very much, talking to us from the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom. Robert Bryce from the United States in Austin, Texas. Thank you too for joining us on this edition of Inside Iraq. Well, for more information on the programme, and indeed if you want to send us your comments, go to aljazeera.net/English. That's our website. That's all we have time for this edition. Join us again next week when we take another look inside Iraq. Goodbye.